Thanks. Can you hear me? Yes. Yes, we launched this project. Fahamu is a network, Africa-based network, though our office is in Oxford, that promotes social justice, human rights and development issues across Africa, and we publish a weekly e-magazine, Pambazuka News, which has several thousand contributors all over Africa, and within it we have a China-Africa Watch section which deals specifically with this relationship. And we developed this because we felt that the discussion of this relationship was very much dominated by the concerns of the global north. And what was missing was an African contribution, which is why we produced this book, which I think was the first book, though it was edited by an obviously un-African me and my colleague Mano, who can't be here, but who is from Kenya. But the rest of it is overwhelmingly African contributions to this topic, because that's what we felt was the gap. And arising out of that, we held a conference on the fringe of the Development Bank meeting in Shanghai, which brought together civil society activists from Africa and China, and of course they were facing many of the same problems, so we thought, hey, we should develop these links, and that's what we've been trying to do. And in fact we have another book coming out shortly, which I co-edited, which brings together some of the contributions to a seminar we were able to hold in Nairobi that brought together both African and Chinese activists and scholars looking at this particular issue. And the dominant northern perspective on this is about the Chinese threat, the new imperialism, China's grab for Africa. And the suggestion that China is doing the same that we did 100 years ago. And I think this is a rather flattery, self-regarding attitude for those of us from the global north. First of all, it smugly implies that we aren't doing it anymore. It's them. And we, of course, have moved on and aren't doing such nasty things. Secondly, it demonizes China, which at the worst is doing no worse than anybody else not only has done but is still doing today. And thirdly, it infantilizes Africans by presenting them as the poor, gullible souls who are not only the recipients of Bob Geldof's charity, but also the victims of these fast-talking Chinese with their smooth patter, and the poor Africans don't know how to respond to it. And what we noticed, what I certainly noticed in the rather offended African responses to this sort of discourse, is that first of all, while nobody, I think one reaction I noticed from African respondents was that they feel they don't need to be told by Europeans and Americans about the danger of being exploited by foreigners, and they don't need to be told that the Chinese may actually be out for themselves, horror of horrors. They do appreciate that choice has been widened by Chinese intervention. It is true, and it isn't any the less true because it's a constant theme of Chinese propaganda, that China does not have a colonial past in Africa, that China is present in those parts of Africa where African governments, yes, governments, not necessarily peoples, actually want them to be there, not because they've inherited a position deriving from past colonialism. And the no strings attached, non-intervention, no conditionality is two-sided. Yes, it means that China deals with countries that have shabby human rights records. The West, despite its protestations, is not innocent of doing that either. But it also means that the absence of IMF conditionality doesn't only mean that there are no conditionalities about human rights and good governance. It also means that there are no conditionalities about the privatisation of public services, about the disappearance of free education and free healthcare from many African countries, which managed to make great gains in those areas in the first decade of independence and had to scrap them because of IMF conditionality. And if you take Western conditionality as a total package, it seems that the human rights element of it means that you should have ever greater democratic freedom to elect governments that have less and less power to actually do anything on behalf of local people rather than in the interests of global multinationals. And the fact that China can offer a total package which includes, which of course is self-interested, which includes investment in infrastructure, which nobody else these days seems to be interested in doing, and can offer a rapid, no questions asked turnaround, is actually a plus. And if it's bad governments that benefit from it, that is as much an African problem as a Chinese one. The Chinese have no objection to dealing with democratic governments where they exist, and in general operate within the laws that are in force. And if those laws are bad laws or absent laws, or local governments are corrupt and Chinese firms take advantage of that, they are not behaving any differently in that respect to anybody else. That is, as it were, the pro case, not the Chinese pro case, which will tell you that everything in the garden is wonderful, but as far as I can make it out, the African pro case, which feels it doesn't need to be lectured by the West on how to beware of foreigners with self-interested intentions. There are, of course, points of friction, but they again have two sides. There is friction with local traders who face competition from Chinese products and from Chinese traders themselves, and there are complaints about the poor quality of goods. But there are also consumer benefits. People are able to afford shoes, washing machines, televisions that they couldn't previously have afforded. And maybe they don't last as long as the better quality product that they couldn't afford anyway, but is that really the point? And as Chinese manufacturers point out, they provide the goods that Chinese traders say they want. If you go to a factory in Guangzhou and say, we want shoes that we can sell at such and such a price, they will provide you with shoes that you can sell at such and such a price. And I recall hearing at a conference a representative of the Kampala market traders complaining that Chinese traders sold watches which were very cheap but which didn't work a week afterwards. Well, I have seen watches for sale in Oxford Market at ludicrously cheap prices, which don't work a week afterwards. And if you came back and asked for your money back, the trader would say, "What do you expect for the price you paid?" So I think some of the point about this is the Chinese are often blamed for things that are not specifically Chinese. And the same also applies, I think, where some of the human rights issues are concerned, which is not in any way to downplay the importance of the human rights issues. If China is present and supporting, though as Richard rightly said, its attitude is modifying in its own self-interest, regimes like those in Zimbabwe or in Sudan, it may be, as some American commentators have argued, that because it is a natural affinity of dictatorships and authoritarian governments for each other, that there is a sinister international bloc of dictatorships with China at its core. Or it may be that China is looking for a way into Africa where it can avoid direct confrontation with and competition with already established actors, because more generally it's China's strategy to rise without conflict, without alarming people, and to be accepted as a member of the community of nations. And the obvious place to enter is the place where nobody else will go. And if the reason why nobody else will go is human rights, that doesn't worry the Chinese. Clearly they're not going to insist on greater human rights for Africans than the Chinese themselves are allowed to enjoy. But it's not that necessarily that they're positively attracted to repressive regimes. There are complaints about Chinese poor labour practices, particularly on the copper mines in Zambia. These copper mines, of course, closed because they were uneconomic. The Chinese were willing to come in and make them work. Clearly, they could only do that by cutting down on costs. That has led to very poor labour practices. But, you know, that's the play of market forces. And it was the IMF and it was the West that insisted that countries like Zambia should open themselves up to global market forces and should dismantle the social protection that they had built up in the years after independence. So the worst that China is doing, and it should certainly be condemned when it does it, is to take advantage of the opportunities that the West has insisted that African countries should open up, not only for China, but for Western countries as well. And just finally, a point that I'm sure others will make, it's wrong to think in any case of the Chinese presence as monolithic. There is distinction to be made between China's state-owned enterprises, the role of Chinese private firms in Africa, the role of local Chinese entrepreneurs, Chinese immigrants who are in business in Africa, and the role of China's central government and the role of provincial governments. These are all different, and to lump them all together as one monolith called China is also misleading. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Stephen.